Good morning. I guess it's morning for you. It's morning for me. Tuesday. Here we go. We are in lesson three as we work through the book of Galatians. Been an interesting study. The lesson title is Liberation by Grace. And the passage is Galatians chapter 2, 1 through 10. The main idea is grace creates fellowship with like minded believers. And Paul's continuing this discussion on how he reached out finally to other apostles, other Christian leaders of his day to deal with the issue of what do we do with the Gentiles? Do we make them be circumcised, observe the law of Moses, do all the interpretations of the Ten Commandments, which there's over 600 of them. And Paul's opinion is no. If you do that, you're voiding out the redemptive ministry of Jesus. If there's something you could do to save yourself, then why did Jesus need to die on the cross? And so he's just completely against that. He was not against doing things to help people in their faith if it caused them to stumble. To him, that's different. But if it's a salvation issue, like you go do this and then you're going to be right with God, it was kind of like, no, a salvation thing. He was against works, and he was against legalism too. It's kind of the same thing. Main idea is grace creates fellowship with like-minded believers, and he goes and Peter and James and John give him the right hand of fellowship, and they agree that God's plan has always been to extend grace and salvation to the Gentiles. It's not just a Jewish thing. I like the question to explore. Do you have a need for fellowship with other Christians? And man, the answer is yes. You may not know it, but you do. God never created us to have our faith in isolation. So find you a church, find you some Christian friends, um, plug in somewhere. And the thing also is we may not agree on everything, but we can agree on the most important things and build off of that. And that's what Paul did with other Christian leaders. So build bridges, don't burn bridges, build bridges. And we don't have to agree on everything. That's okay. We can agree on the most basic, important things. Again, I'm going to say Paul's giving you a lot of background material that we don't quite understand. He talks about going to Jerusalem and meeting with James and Peter and John, and where did that happen? It either happens in Acts chapter 11, verse 27. Let me read that to you. During this time, some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. Well, you're not going down, you're going up, but that's how they always phrased it because Jerusalem always up on a mountain. One of them, named Agabus, stood up and through the Spirit predicted that a severe famine would spread over the entire Roman world, which happened. This happened during the reign of Claudius. The disciples, as each one was able, decided to provide help for the brothers and sisters living in Judea, which is Jerusalem. This they did, sending their gift to the elders by Barnabas and Saul. I love it that they call them elders, but Barnabas and Saul are the two that go down there and deliver the offering. And maybe this is where what Paul is describing. The only other place it could be is Acts 15, but Paul in the passage today describes it as something that he did kind of privately. Acts 15 was like a big church council, and it wasn't private. And so, how do you make that timeline work? It's a good thing to try to do that in your mind when you study the Bible, but sometimes we just don't have enough information to pin it down exactly. So, and this may be one of those things. Go read Acts 15. I think it would help you. So let's go ahead and get into the passage today and see what we can do with it. He's dealing with the fact that, you know, he's not happy with the Jewish believers being misled by the Judaizers, leaving the Christian faith and going back to Judaism. And it's like, dude, if you do that, you've always got to keep the letter of the law every time, forever. And if you can't do that, which you can't, then you're going to stand before God in sin. Wouldn't you rather stand before God in grace, depending upon what Jesus did for you, not what you can do for yourself? That's kind of the point. And he's mad about the Judaizers, and he's like trying to reason with these Jewish Christians. He's also dealing with the fact that people have been accusing him of being self appointed and a self made apostle and all this. And he feels the need to push back. So he does in Galatians. So here we go. Chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Then after an interval of 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas. And you notice in that passage I just read, they mentioned Barnabas, taking Titus along also. Now, that's not mentioned. It was because of a revelation that I went up and I submitted to them the gospel which I preached among the Gentiles. But I did so in private. Now, that's important. To take those to those who were of reputation, for fear that I might be running or had run in vain. So he said he went up there in private. Acts 15 does not seem very private, where Acts 11:27 through 30 more so. And so he really wants to iron out this whole thing and make sure everybody's in agreement that we don't need to bind, put the Gentiles in yoke. He describes later a yoke of slavery to the law that nobody could ever live up to. He's later going to say, the law was not there as a way of salvation. It was to show us that we're sinners. And so good luck with trying to keep the law all the time forever, and be good enough to earn the right to live forever with a holy God, because you just can't do it. And so he says he went down in private to those who were of reputation. I think that's interesting how he terms that. Not sure quite where he's coming from with that. Maybe he's trying to communicate something with that. But anyway, so look at 3 through 6. But not even Titus, who was with me, though he was Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. Now, does he mean Titus didn't feel like he needed to be circumcised, or no one else tried to compel him to be circumcised? The point is, Titus is Greek, and he wasn't circumcised, and he did not become circumcised because that would be an act of work. Okay, it's something you do to make yourself right, and that's not what salvation is about. Good luck with trying to be perfect all the time. But it was because of the false brethren secretly brought in, who had sneaked in to spy out our liberty. Liberty's a big word here, which we have in Christ Jesus, in order to bring us into bondage. So these Judaizers are sneaking into the churches, and they're spreading a heresy of works, and Paul's not happy about it. And he says, good luck with that. You're going to be in bondage if you believe that. But we did not yield in subjection to them for even an hour, so that the truth of the gospel would remain with you. But from those who were of high reputation, see, he says it again, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. See, he's poking a little bit of fun at that. Those who were of reputation contributed nothing to me. And he's coming back and saying, the gospel that I have is by revelation, by inspiration from the Lord, not from other people. Okay. So he goes down, and it's like, okay, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to come to agreement about what we should do with the Gentiles. Um, and so, if that happened in Acts 11, and then in Acts 15, they have the Jerusalem conference. Part of what we're seeing here is several times Paul and others are discussing this issue. And that's part of, I think, the teaching of the lesson is things aren't ever settled once, really. It's things that we have to keep discussing and keep affirming. It's repetition. And people learn by repetition, and things get done by repetition. We are the type that we don't like repetition sometimes. It's kind of like, okay, we've done this, we've already discussed this, move along. But no, sometimes good happens because of that. And we need to keep talking about things. And that's how we learn, that's how we settle issues. Uh, Sometimes you don't get it once. Okay. So let's read 7 through 10. But on the contrary, seeing that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been to the circumcised, for he who effectively worked for Peter in his apostleship to the circumcised effectively worked for also me to the Gentiles, and recognizing the grace that had been given to me, James and Cephas and John, who were reputed to be pillars, so here he's saying that again, gave to me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, so that we might go to the Gentiles, and they to the circumcised. They only asked us to remember the poor, the very thing also was eager to do. Now, that's interesting, because if you go and read Acts 15, that's one of the things that James spelled out at the end of the chapter is no. Gentiles are not saved by works, they're saved by grace. And let's not put that on them, but encourage them just to be obedient to God's will, um, and to help with the offerings, and help take care of their Jewish friends, and help and remember the poor. So this sounds familiar to Acts 15, and that's what kind of makes it a little bit confusing. Maybe they Paul met privately in Acts 11, and they agreed like they did in Acts 15, and same thing is, remember the poor. We don't really know, but it does sound familiar, doesn't it? The thing that kind of messes us up is Acts 15 was not private. Um, Acts 11, you could see where it could be private. So once again, Peter, James, and John tend to lean uh, Jewish. Okay, they stick close to Jerusalem. We know Peter didn't, but James did. John tends to do that. Ephesus later, was in exile later, but Peter, eventually went to Rome. Um, but Paul would first go to the synagogue. He'd get frustrated with him, then he'd go preach to the Gentiles. So both groups really do minister to both, but Paul predominantly becomes the great missionary to the Gentiles. Well, they agree that let's not put this burden on the Gentiles. Um, they can't do that. Let's not do that. And really, it saved the Christian church, the decision. Okay. Well, let's talk about some truths. First thing is that we're saved by grace and not by works. We just need to keep hammering that truth down. He's really going to get there later and deal with that more as we progress into the book of Galatians. It's interesting to me that Paul dealt so much with his past history in the book of Galatians. I've not really got that before. So we continue to learn, don't we? Second thing is that he's building a bridge. He's building a bridge to Peter, James, and John. And there was potential there to not agree, but everybody's trying to find some agreement and understand God's will. Um, we should do the same. There are people that I'm not going to agree with, like the Catholic priest here in town. I need to go over there and meet him and tell him, hey, I support what you're doing. I don't agree theologically with everything that he does, but they're not a cult. They are a Christian faith. There's going to be Catholics in heaven, so we might as well get along here on the earth and try to support one another. Doesn't mean I've got to give them my money. They've got their own people to take care of that, but I can support what he does and support him as a person. I think that's kind of a major teaching of the lesson this week. So let's go build some bridges, and let's not be legalists. Let's be people of liberty, and not think that people got to clean themselves up and do all these things before they come to Jesus. No, He loves them just like they are. So we should too. Let me pray with you. Jesus, we love you. We love each other. And I thank you for this passage. And I thank you that we live under grace and under liberty. And I thank you that your Spirit comes into us and gives us the power to live the way you want us to. But that's obedience. That's not salvation. Lord, bless us this week. Help us to keep our eyes on you, not the problems of this life. In your name I pray. Amen. You have a great one. We'll do it again next week. See you.